Welcome to my first real video. I never really planned on making this video or really any commentary type of video, mostly because I think it's lazy. But as I'm currently inundated with free time, because I'm becoming more and more jaded with the topic at hand, I felt I needed to put it into video form, sort of like an impromptu, kind of scripted rant. But enough with the prefacing, let me get right into my rant. Quick disclaimer, I'm not one of the usual suspects you'd expect to be criticizing someone like SyntheticMan. And honestly, these are all opinions I have based on observations, times I used to watch him and a few other people related to him. I used to be a fan of his and enjoyed some of his videos in the past, so I would consider myself someone on the right wing, far right even. But I'm afraid I'm not the kind of person that rocks with somebody with cognitive dissonance and someone who professes to be of a right-wing ideology but doesn't actually immerse himself in that culture very well. Which, I suppose kind of segues into my first issue, at least partially. Simply put, Synth's more of a grifter than somebody who actually cares about what he's talking about. Aside from his, at least from what I've seen, aside from his passion for Jap slop like Dragon Ball Z, I personally don't give a fuck about that franchise. And that's not exactly a baseless accusation. And he's not a grifter like Andy Pants Gaming per se. But instead his videos seem to capitalize on the doomer/joomer minded individuals who profess to notice things but never actually do anything about said things. He's explicitly said on multiple occasions, mostly during his streams, that he's just doing streams and making videos for the money at this point. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, that's, I guess, most people with the following on YouTube nowadays. But as any reasonable person would know, that starts to incentivize playing up negativity or something that obviously their follower base grew on for the sake of viewership. And the arguments made in the videos will basically eventually become more and more insincere, which is ironic given his takes on the death of sincerity in gaming. On a slightly related note to this point, and kind of why I just decided I wanted to do this video, his recent video regarding Borderlands 4, which is, like, let's get things straight, obviously is yet another blight on the franchise, mostly compounds on this notion of mine. He clearly doesn't care about the franchise. He doesn't care about the game. And, I mean, I would think fair enough, right? But it seems like he's never actually given the games before Borderlands 3 a modicum of a chance. As far as I can recall anyways, he said that he's only seen and heard about the games, and I think tried playing it once, but he said he just didn't like the looter shooter aspects, which fair enough. But and while I would agree Borderlands 1 and the pre-sequel were pretty mid, Borderlands 2 warrants at least some level of respect at the gameplay and storytelling level. While the writing, the humor certainly reeks of 2012's era satire, it should be noted that obviously this game was a product of its time. I mean, it was developed up until that point, released in 2012. But despite that, if you've actually played through the story and trudged through the poorly aged humor, which, I mean, I guess it comes down to perspective, I still think it's kind of charming, you would find that the gem really lies in the storytelling, mostly in the villain of the story, Handsome Jack, who had been touted as one of the best villains in gaming, at least at that time. And it certainly shows with the performance of his actor, his voice actor, and of course his character's writing, as he progressively becomes more and more weary of your presence, treating you like a real threat as you continue to play through the game, and of course play through the story, which is another praise I must give to Borderlands 2, as in that game your character's presence is like it's acknowledged, whereas in the future games your character's presence is almost non-existent. You're kind of just treated as a ghost, and everything happening in cutscenes basically has nothing to do with you. The humor throughout the story, at least as you're playing through the story, would begin to die down, and the story would become a little bit more than just a satire once you've killed Jack's daughter. This seems to be something that isn't really acknowledged by Synth, even in his criticisms of the game. Well, aside from my obvious shilling of Borderlands 2, his criticisms of the franchise isn't totally unwarranted, but now I must get into some more valid criticisms of Synth as a person. Though this may be relatively old drama, at least a couple months at this point, it's something that stuck with me a bit and contributed to my disliking of Synth. His obsession with Kirsche and his willingness to abandon and backstab his audience for her is just pathetic. It's like the moment he had some attention from this blacked, beached whale caused him to start acting up and switch up on his subscribers. Not even an atom of gooch was promised to him 3,000 years ago. He just folded to this VTuber, which is ironic given his prior criticisms of VTubers as a whole. And another thing, he's explicitly stated he would sacrifice his audience for a wife, which, yeah, that was I would assume is a joke, but let's be totally and brutally honest. This guy has lost any chances he's had. Not necessarily because he's built like DSP's long-lost bastard child, but instead because of his attitude, really, and, well, I guess we'll kind of get into that a little bit later, his attitude towards life. His outright banning of popular members of his community was also comical. I'm not totally sure, because I haven't kept up, if he's unbanned a few of the guys. He said he would unban some people, but from what I could recall, they never did, and he even doubled down on many of the bans. And of course, this was mostly due to the Kirsche drama. And it's mostly because they spoke the truth in regards to his hypocrisy and complete and utter retardation in the handling of the situation, which I think will transition pretty perfectly into the next problem here. His overall handling of any drama or criticisms is just actual autism. The dude is going straight into lolcow territory, which, to be honest, he's more than earned the title of lolcow. Can't deal with valid criticism. Not the type that you would see from, the fatherless women who have probably seen one of his clips through Twitter, but instead criticisms from within his own community. Going back to the Kirsche drama, he refused to listen to his viewers, telling him that, his all-in approach to Kirsche would be all for nothing, as she was clearly grifting off of his audience and off of him, like a prostitute picking the busiest street in search of people who frequent it for the services that people like her would offer. Last I checked, nothing else came of their interactions. And guess what? The people that warned Synth were either silenced, mocked, or banned. On another slightly related note, his Gollum brother, who goes by Lord Frogmire on YouTube, who, funnily enough, looks even more Jewish than the Jews that they mock, also sucks at taking valid criticisms, or even taking certain insults on the chin very well. he just can't admit that his success is mostly due to nepotism, due to his relation to synth, and due to the fact that a lot of synths fans and a few other channels who don't necessarily revolve around synth, but kind of frequent those circles, all subscribe to him, kind of giving him an immediate audience right off the rip, right? Going as far as to say others like Latina Parfait or Kane's Games or whatever also benefited off of synth, which as far as my knowledge goes for Latina Parfait, it isn't very true, considering Parfait primarily just uses synth clips as gags in his, her videos, and had initially started with videos unrelated to synth, kind of along the same lines of like criticizing, I guess culture. It was mostly like NT-SJW type stuff before. It was mostly unrelated to synth, and I don't think Parfait was ever shouted out by synth. I mean, from what I can recall anyway. I'm pretty sure I had come across their channel organically, too. Point being, even since Autistic Brother can't handle valid criticisms. Lastly, I guess this is the more personal level. Synth is just a fucking ghoul. The dude doesn't take care of himself. You can tell. He has mold or some shit. He doesn't hold true to his supposed right-wing beliefs. And I would suppose that's evident in his lack of religious convictions. Which likely contributes to a lot of his horrible fucking, habits. Something like porn addiction is not something you would want to air out to everybody. But also to his worst takes, such as in regards to the Charlie Kirk's assassination. It's like one of those guys who are claim to be so far right that, someone like Charlie Kirk, him dying doesn't mean a thing. Well, here's the thing. As much as I personally didn't really fully follow Charlie Kirk, I didn't really like him, mostly because of the Israel takes. It's also important to note that Charlie Kirk was coming around to noticing certain things about Israel. But, of course, someone like Synth doesn't have that level of nuance, or it doesn't have the capacity to have that level of nuance. He's a doomer through and through, someone who could never really hope to take himself out of his, I guess, supposedly depressing situation, but he's too much of a bitch to really put an end to it. He's had chances with real women, at least based on certain stories we've heard from him, I think both in school and outside of school, but he failed to take life by the throat and pull up his fucking nuts to actually go out with them, or actually, do something for himself. His beliefs are, at least as it pertains to him, are vapid, hollow. They just serve to benefit him. Going back to the kind of thinking he's more like a grifter, and he will always have an army of losers who refuse to see that. At least don't even they just try to push that away. I think it's just best to rip off the Band-Aid. Even his sycophants, people like What the Egad, have this dogmatic devotion to him and refuse to admit Synth is going off the deep end, becoming the lolcow we said he could never be. Frankly, I'm surprised anyone or someone like him even claimed these beliefs in the first place, due to his Reddit tier understanding of philosophy and religion. Again, going back to his r/atheism nonsense. Additionally, Synth doesn't have much of an admirable personality to begin with. I would argue he's more insufferable than entertaining to watch, at least as I became a little bit more and more jaded with his videos. I get we didn't really watch his videos for his personality, and we mostly watched it due to his takes, which I would still say a lot of them are true. I understand that. But if your takes begin to reek of insincerity, you start to kind of take a nosedive, or at least you're kind of proving yourself to be a bit of a fucking idiot, then having a personality would at least kind of rescue you a little bit. It'll be your fucking rescue device, or it'll be something that carries the rest of the video. Well, Synth isn't funny, and ironically, this motherfucker thinks there's no point in trying to be funny, as his terminally online ass will deem it clown maxing, like most losers without a redeemable personality would call it. I would rather consume the slop he protests against than listen to another one of his low-tier ramblings, if it means I'll laugh at the horrible writing, rather than constantly feed my mind with his mindless drivel. Late edit. There was a video from Soycast Guy addressing Synth's take on Charlie Kirk's assassination. If you're interested in his response to Synth, you could just go check that out. But I think I'll add some further criticisms of Synth now that I have even more more context about this. Synth is not self-aware. Anytime he brings up what God wants, it should immediately be disregarded. He's addicted to trans porn. Well, Buddha porn, but that's basically just cartoon trans porn. He's a Redditier atheist, and he doesn't seem to understand the concept of being anything other than a self-loathing, useless blight on humanity. He also doesn't grasp the concept of his own fans disagreeing with him, and will go on a schizophrenic tirade, accusing them of being glowies or foreigners, almost as if human beings sympathizing for other human beings isn't an understandable concept to his alien brain. He professes white power, but shits on those who actually succeed in perhaps that goal. Someone like Charlie Kirk having a white wife and having white children. Crazy, right? Well, going back to his Jumer rant saying that, oh, well, Charlie's a traitor. He was an Israelite shill, this other shit, right? Well, here's the thing, is that's a lot of people in America, unfortunately, but, the best thing you can do is educate them. And guess what? Kirk was starting to become a little bit more of actually started noticing a little bit, started to criticize Israel a bit more because, it became safe to do so, but hey, criticism is a criticism. If you just throw that away and you're like, nah, he was always a shill, then you're just being stupid and ignorant, and probably willfully ignorant at that. Well, the great irony with Synth's anti-satanic rants on various videos is that Synth himself is a satanic psyop, especially due to his perpetuation of the doomer mindset. I mean, think about it, dude. You know what God would want? For someone not to be a low-T loser like you? Whatever. All in all, these are just my opinions, based on my observations, and limited ones at that. If you want some backstory on the Kirsche drama, go to Poor is Sexy. If his channel's still up, he, I think, went on hiatus, but some of his last videos were in regards to his handling of the Kirsche situation. And for a recap of the Lord Frogmire nonsense, you could watch, I guess, one of the videos from Latina Parfait. They handled it, although Latina Parfait's personality is also a bit of an acquired taste. But I'm not going to devote more than 1 hour to documenting everything I have stated. This is one of those who know versus those who don't know kind of videos. So if you're some random stumbling onto this video, Honestly, I don't really have anything else to say to you, except for maybe fuck you. Really shitty recording software. Well, that's pretty funny.